Welcome back everybody to my final video on the Catalan. Today we're going to talk about move orders a little bit and about one ingenious game by Fabiano Caruana that I've never seen anything similar in the Catalan so I felt that it's a good way to close the series. So let's enjoy that game together. So talking about move order, of course the usual starting moves are d4, knight f6, c4, e6. And now most of the time you will see knight f3. And then after d5, g3, we are kind of at the starting position. But of course, after knight f3, there are other options. For instance, b6, leading to the Queen's Indian. And this is something that you can actually stop by starting with g3 here, which was also played in the game. So here there's definitely no b6. And if you know that this is something you want to avoid, you can play around with the move order a bit, and soon we'll see there are other benefits to starting with g3. After d5, bishop g2, black took on c4, and in the game we are looking at, Caruana versus Viswanathan Anand, white went queen a4 check, knight bd7, queen c4, a6. And if we had the same position with the knight on f3, this one, there would be no stopping b5. And black would solve one of his main issues in the Catalan, namely to get the bishop on the long diagonal opposing the mighty Catalan bishop on g2. So this position is no danger for black. But here it is much harder. Because clearly if black were to play b5, he does attack the queen, but on the next move he cannot oppose the bishop on the diagonal and will just have to move the rook from a8 or somehow close the diagonal with knight d5. And here Caruana is not only playing against b5, but he played a very interesting move, bishop e3. It's clear that he's now also fighting against the advance c7, c5, with which black wants to even the playing field in the center. If black were to go b5, then after queen c1, rook b8, knight d2, the knight would be headed to b3, and it would clearly become very hard for black to push c7, c5. So black didn't go b5, but instead chose bishop d6, clearly hinting that c5 is not the only way that black can play in the center. There's also the option of e6, e5. We see this quite rarely in the Catalan, but it's very important to also cover the structure after the exchange of the e and d pawns, because out of pretty much any line where black takes on c4, we can get to such a structure too. So here white went queen c2, basically saying the queen doesn't belong there, so put it on c2 before it gets attacked. Black castled, but it's also important to understand what's wrong with knight d5, because it looks like a tempo gaining move on the bishop on e3. White would go bishop d2, c5, which is logical once you drive the bishop away from e3, dc5, knight c3. And suddenly we see that the black knight is awkward on d5, because of course black does not want to take and just help white's development, but knight on d5 is attacked, so black needs to do something. And if he goes knight b4, white just drops back with the queen. He will continue developing with knight f3, castles, rook will go to d1. There are also knight jumps to g5 once the knight is on f3, and these knights, they actually don't do anything. They are misplaced, and at any point they can be kicked out with a3, b4. So these tempos that black has spent moving the knights, they are not gained. They were just spent on placing the knights on bad squares. So basically, white was kind of provoking black to start moving the knight with knight d5. But Anand could not be provoked, he castled. And now another very interesting move. Logical when we consider that white is stopping black's queenside expansion though. Knight h3. And this is what I meant when at the beginning of the video I was talking about never having seen a Catalan game like this. the development of the knight to h3 is extremely unusual because, of course, often we start even with a move order where the knight is already on f3. But it just shows how much depth this opening has and how much room for ideas. And of course, it's in line with the previous white moves. So black goes e5, white castles. Here, black could not go knight g4 because bishop g5 is a very good way to meet that. And black never wants to play f6. So he went to h6, preparing knight g4. That's why white took on e5. Now we continue development, knight c3, queen e7. Queen has to leave the open file, rook ad1, rook e8. So far very normal. Black also posts up on the half open e file. Knight f4. Kind of hinting that white can jump to the d5 now, therefore c6. So basically both sides are just making logical developing moves so far. Bishop d4, centralizing the bishop, avoiding any funny business with knight c4, knight g4. And here, black, for the first time, had a difficult decision to make. The normal developing move would be bishop d7, connecting the rooks, preparing rook ad8. It would be met by knight e4, rook ad8, and here the first sting, bishop b6. We see that this pawn structure also with a6 and c6 is not optimal because it left some holes behind. And now that black cannot fight for the open file, white just doubles on the d file and starts to accumulate a positional advantage. That shows that somehow white's coordination is better. And it's a little bit magical when you play the Catalan. Somehow from the beginning, white's coordination is superior, and black always faces some kind of positional issues, one would call it. And then there are players like world champion Anatoly Karpov, in the old days, nowadays Magnus Carlsen. They always manage to use this to the fullest extent. And here, for example, the move knight e4 is just removing a very good piece from black, the knight on f6, and just starting to have a presence in the center. And there are ideas like bishop h7 checked and going back to f5. And if we would exchange on f5, the queen would be very strong on f5, while black's pieces are actually not really doing much. And we saw that white also has good cards to fight for control of the d file. So overall, we can just sense that white is somewhat for choice in this position. And Anand felt that too. He lashed out with g5. Of course, white is forced to go knight d3, which opens up the possibility for black to go bishop f5 eventually. But he had to pay a price that is permanently weakening his king. If here he went bishop f5, which is logical, white would go e4. Now remove the queen from the bishop's diagonal, d8, and after some exchanges, we would receive a position like this. At first sight, it looks pretty level, but the white king is very safe. Let's give him some other color, and the black king is permanently weakened. And white will exploit this eventually with this 4-on-3 majority when he starts breaking with f4, e5, pushing black's pieces back and potentially opening files. So this is something that's always on the cards and black has to watch out for. And we also see that this bishop on h7 is completely blocked in by the pawn on e4. And usually black doesn't find a way to capture on e4 because then everything will be exposed on the e file, basically pinned. So here white is simply a bit better. And Anand should have played bishop f5 because otherwise it's hard to develop, but he started with knight d3, bishop e5, queen d2, removing the queen from the vulnerable diagonal and also now taking control of the d file. Anyways, black had to go bishop f5 eventually, e4, bishop g6. If you wonder why in the last line I put the bishop on h7, it's because black may not want to see f4, f5 coming with tempo, which is what will happen in the game. But of course on h7, it looks even more out of the game than on g6. So all in all, a lot of difficult decisions to take for black. Anyways, here white felt ready for f4, opening up the position. And black should have taken on d4, then play rook a d8 and try to fight back here. But after rook d1, white will remain better with his control of the d-file. Instead, after f4, black took, opening up the g-file, which doesn't look so dangerous right away, but it will become clear very soon that it was already the decisive mistake. White took on e5, gf4, king h1, and now, of course, f4, f5 is a very big threat because the queen will immediately look at the pawn on h6. So when both sides went for this position, they already had to foresee everything that's going to happen from here, since black absolutely has to take on e4, and if it works, it's great. If not, then of course the whole operation was flawed, starting with taking on f4. So, of course, the point is that taking makes absolutely no sense. There is bishop e4 with check, but white immediately starts switching attention to the black king. Now e4 is hanging because of the pin, and on a move like this, the defender would just be removed. So black had to go rook d4, and here the final finesse. Anand must have been hoping for queen f2 when he still has king h8, and the f5 bishop h7, nothing is happening. But from e3, the queen is also looking at h6. So here Anand actually resigned because he has issues everywhere and he needs to do something about f5. But as I said, if he goes king h8, then f5 queen h6 is a mating attack. And if he would play king h7, then after f5, bishop h5, rook h3, no defense. Eventually, black is cracking on h6. So, going back a little bit, there were, of course, some very interesting moments early on. First of all, let's talk about the move order again. Bishop g2 gives white this extra option of playing queen a4 here and going for a very interesting position where black has unusual problems to solve. But of course, if black would play any other move like bishop e7, then we just go back to the main lines. But this move order basically allows you to have a second option against dc4 and just have one line that you focus your attention on. While with the knight already on f3, there are a million things that can happen. But here you have this queen a4 line, which is just very interesting in itself. And back when this game was played at the Chess Olympiad, it got everyone's attention because the whole concept with bishop e3, knight h3 was very unusual, but as analysis showed, definitely very worthwhile and leading to positions where white can set problems for his opponent for quite some time. I hope you enjoyed this video and the whole series, and there will be more to come from me on chess.com. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.